Bull's face hit the pavement. His wheelchair lay sideways. His prosthetic legs, the ones he'd spent 18 months learning to use after Afghanistan took his real ones, twisted beneath him. Above him, Officer Mason laughed. "Not so special now, are you, wheelchair boy?" 65 years old, 3 Purple Hearts, 22 years serving his country, and here he was, face down in a VA parking lot while a cop called him a fraud. He didn't know help was coming. 47 motorcycles, 3 miles away, already moving. The ground would shake before Mason stopped smiling. If you want to see how this satisfying story ends, please subscribe my channel and watch until the end. Comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. Bull's hands were shaking. Not from fear, never from fear. 22 years in Special Forces had burned that weakness out of him long ago. His hands shook from the effort of staying calm, while every instinct screamed at him to fight back. But how do you fight when you're missing both legs and your left arm ends at the elbow? "I asked you a question, wheelchair boy." Officer Derek Mason leaned down until his face was inches from Bull's. "Where'd you steal these plates?" "I didn't steal anything." Bull kept his voice level, controlled. The way he'd spoken to Taliban fighters during interrogations. The way he'd talked down suicide bombers in Kandahar. "Those are my Purple Heart plates. Earned them, 3 times over." Mason laughed. Actually laughed. "Purple Heart? You? Let me guess, you fell off a bar stool and claimed PTSD." A small crowd had gathered in the VA Medical Center parking lot. Other veterans, mostly. Men and women who recognized the look in Bull's eyes. The look of someone who'd seen things that couldn't be unseen. An elderly man in a Vietnam veteran cap pulled out his phone and started recording. "Sir, please step back," Mason snapped at him. "This is official police business." "Looks like harassment to me," the old veteran replied. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled with age and anger. "That man's got proper documentation. I can see his placard from here." "Did I ask for your opinion, Grandpa?" Mason's hand moved to his taser. "One more word and you're under arrest for obstruction." The old veteran fell silent, but he didn't stop recording. Bull watched this exchange with growing dread. Not for himself, he'd faced worse than a corrupt cop with an attitude problem. He was worried about these other veterans, good people who didn't deserve to get caught up in whatever power trip Mason was on. "Officer," Bull tried one more time, "my appointment is in 15 minutes. Dr. Chen at the prosthetics clinic. You can call and verify." "I don't need to verify anything." Mason straightened up and keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need a tow truck at the VA Medical Center, East parking lot. Vehicle with suspected fraudulent disabled plates." The words hit Bull like a physical blow. Fraudulent. He looked down at what remained of his body. The empty space below his knees where his legs used to be. The stump of his left arm, ending just below the elbow. The scars that covered what was left. Silver lines mapping the explosion that had changed everything. Fraudulent. He'd earned every one of these wounds, paid for them with blood and screaming, and 18 months of rehabilitation at Walter Reed. Paid for them with nightmares that still woke him at 3 a.m., reaching for a rifle that wasn't there to fight enemies that existed only in his memories. "You know what I think?" Mason continued, clearly enjoying himself. "I think you bought that wheelchair at a garage sale. Probably borrowed those plates from a real veteran. Guys like you make me sick." "Guys like me?" Bull's voice dropped to barely a whisper, the dangerous whisper that his men had learned to fear more than his shouting. "What exactly do you know about guys like me, officer?" "I know a scammer when I see one." "A scammer?" Bull nodded slowly. "That's what I am, a scammer. Not a Green Beret with 22 years of service. Not a soldier who's carried dying men through enemy fire. Not a sergeant who held his best friend's intestines in his hands while calling for medevac that arrived too late." His voice never rose above that whisper, but somehow it carried across the entire parking lot. "I'm just a scammer because you looked at me for 30 seconds and decided you knew my whole story." Mason's face reddened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone in a wheelchair who should have been easy to intimidate. "You're about to be a scammer without a vehicle," Mason snarled. "Tow truck's on its way. Maybe next time you'll think twice before parking in spaces meant for people who actually deserve them." "I've been parking in this spot for 15 years. Bull's voice was still that dangerous whisper. "Every third Tuesday, for my appointments, ask anyone here." "I don't need to ask anyone anything. I'm the law here." A woman's voice cut through the tension. "Actually, you're not." Mason spun around. A young woman in nurse's scrubs was approaching, her phone held up and clearly recording. Blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, military bearing in her walk despite the civilian clothes. "Who the hell are you?" "Sarah Mitchell, former Army medic." She positioned herself between Mason and Bull's wheelchair. "And I know for a fact that Sergeant Thornton's documentation is legitimate because he saved my brother's life in Afghanistan." "Thomas Mitchell. Ring any bells, Sergeant?" Bull looked up at her, his mind racing through memories of firefights in field hospitals and faces he tried so hard to forget. "Mitchell," he repeated slowly. "Young kid, took shrapnel to the neck. I carried him half a mile to the evac point. He's alive because of you." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "He's a teacher now, 3rd grade, has 2 kids, named his son William, after the man who wouldn't let him die." Mason looked between them, his confidence finally wavering. This wasn't going the way he'd expected. The gathered crowd had grown to nearly 30 people, most of them recording on their phones. "That doesn't change the fact that his permits look suspicious," Mason said, but his voice had lost some of its authority. "I have a duty to investigate." "His permits are hanging right there," Sarah pointed at Bull's rearview mirror. "Clear as day. Current registration, Purple Heart plates, everything in order." "Listen, lady, I'm not finished." Sarah's voice hardened. "I've been live streaming this entire encounter. Right now, 43,000 people are watching. That number's climbing every second. Do you really want to be the cop who towed a triple Purple Heart recipient's wheelchair-accessible van from a VA hospital parking lot?" Mason's face went pale. 43,000 people, watching, recording, witnessing. But it was too late to back down now. He'd already called for the tow truck, already committed to this course of action. And Derek Mason had never been good at admitting he was wrong. "I don't care how many people are watching." His voice shook slightly, betraying his nerves. "The law is the law. This vehicle is being towed pending investigation of potentially fraudulent disability documentation." "You're making a mistake," Sarah said quietly. "A big one. The only mistake I see is you interfering with official police business." Mason pulled out his handcuffs. "Keep it up and you'll be taking a ride downtown." Bull had remained silent during this exchange, watching the scene unfold with the tactical awareness of a career soldier. He recognized a look in Mason's eyes, the look of a man who knew he was wrong but couldn't afford to admit it. "Sarah," Bull spoke calmly, "let it go. He wants to tow my van, let him tow it. I'll sort this out later." "Sergeant, no. I've survived worse than a corrupt cop in a tow truck." Bull managed a small smile. "This is just another battle. I'll win it the right way, through proper channels." But even as he said the words, something inside him cracked. The van was more than transportation. It was his last connection to independence, to dignity. Margaret had died 2 years ago. No children, no family left, just Bull and his van, and the open road that let him feel, just for a little while, like he was still a complete man. Without the van, he'd be trapped, dependent, everything he'd fought so hard to avoid becoming. Mason saw the defeat in Bull's eyes and smiled. "Finally, some sense. Now just sit there and keep quiet while we wait for the tow truck." "Sir?" One of the veterans in the crowd stepped forward. A big man, mid-50s, with a long gray beard and a leather vest covered in patches. "Do you know who you're harassing?" Mason's hand moved back to his taser. "Another one? I swear this parking lot is full of people who don't know when to shut up. That man is Sergeant William Thornton. The William Thornton, Operation Enduring Freedom, saved 17 lives during an ambush in the Korengal Valley, carried wounded men through enemy fire for 6 hours until extraction arrived. He's being considered for the Congressional Medal of Honor. The silence that followed was deafening, but Mason had already committed, already called for the tow truck, already painted himself into a corner that his pride wouldn't let him escape from. I don't care if he's George Washington. Mason's voice was defensive now, almost desperate. Suspicious documentation is suspicious documentation. The law doesn't make exceptions for heroes. The big veteran shook his head slowly. You're going to regret this, officer, more than you can possibly imagine. Is that a threat? No. The man pulled out his phone and made a call. It's a promise. Mason watched him dial, his unease growing. Who are you calling? Some friends. The big veteran's voice was calm, but there was something in his eyes that made Mason's blood run cold. Old friends, the kind who don't take kindly to veterans being treated like this. He turned away, speaking quietly into his phone. Mason couldn't hear the words, but he caught a few phrases that sent a chill down his spine. Sergeant Thornton, VA parking lot, cop harassment. Yeah, that Thornton. How many can you get here? 15 minutes? Make it 10. When the big veteran hung up, he was smiling, but there was no warmth in that smile, only cold promise. You've got about 10 minutes, he told Mason. I'd use that time wisely if I were you. 10 minutes until what? But the veteran just walked away, his leather vest catching the morning sun. And that's when Mason finally noticed the patches sewn onto the back. Hell's Angels, MC, Arizona Desert. Chapter President Bull had noticed too. His eyes widened slightly in recognition. Hammer? Marcus Jensen? The big veteran turned back, his smile softening when he looked at Bull. Hey, brother, it's been a while. Walter Reed, 2009? You remember. Hard to forget. Hammer walked back over, pointedly ignoring Mason's existence. You helped me through some dark days, Bull. Sat with me when the night terrors got bad. Now it's my turn to sit with you. You don't have to. Yeah. Hammer's voice was thick with emotion. I do. That's what brothers do. Mason watched this exchange with mounting panic. He'd heard stories about the Hells Angels, about their codes of loyalty, their network of connections, their fierce protection of their own. But he'd always dismissed those stories as exaggerated. Looking at Hammer's cold eyes, he was starting to think the stories might have been understated. Listen, Mason's voice had changed, softer now, almost pleading. Maybe we can work this out. I'll cancel the tow truck, do a proper review of the documentation. Too late for that. Hammer didn't even look at him. You made your choice, officer. Now you live with the consequences. I'm the law here. The desperation in Mason's voice was unmistakable. You can't. Can't what? Hammer finally turned to face him, and Mason took an involuntary step backward. Can't call some friends? Can't ask them to come support a fellow veteran who's being harassed? Last I checked, that wasn't illegal. I'm warning you. And I'm ignoring you. Hammer turned back to Bull. How you holding up, brother? Bull shook his head slowly. I've been better. Been worse, too. This isn't the hardest thing I've ever faced. No, but it might be the last hard thing you face alone. In the distance, a sound began to grow. Low at first, barely audible over the traffic noise from the nearby highway. But it grew steadily louder, resolving into a rumble that Bull recognized immediately. Motorcycles. Lots of them. Mason heard it too. His face went from pale to gray as the rumble grew into a roar that seemed to shake the very ground. What is that? He asked, though somewhere deep down, he already knew. That, Hammer said with satisfaction, is the sound of brotherhood. The first motorcycles appeared around the corner of the VA building, chrome gleaming in the morning sun, engines thundering like approaching storm. One by one, they rolled into the parking lot. Harleys mostly, some custom choppers, all ridden by men and women in black leather vests emblazoned with the same patches Hammer wore. Hell's Angels, MC, Arizona Desert. Chapter 10 bikes, 20, 30. They kept coming, spreading out through the parking lot with military precision, positioning themselves at every exit, every entrance. Mason's hand moved to his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need backup at the VA Medical Center. Multiple motorcycle gang members." "We're not a gang." A massive biker with a gray beard and forearms like tree trunks pulled his Harley up next to Mason's patrol car. "We're a club. There's a difference. This is an illegal assembly. We're parked legally, following all traffic laws, just visiting our friend at the VA." The biker smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "Unless visiting friends is illegal now?" 47 motorcycles. Bull counted them automatically. The tactical awareness of a career soldier never truly faded. 47 motorcycles. Maybe 60 riders total, including passengers. All of them now watching Officer Mason with the focused attention of predators studying prey. "Sergeant Thornton." A woman's voice came from nearby. Bull turned to see an older, female biker approaching. Gray hair braided down her back, leather vest covered in patches and pins. "I'm Angela Torres, road captain. Hammer called ahead, told us what was happening. We got here as fast as we could. You didn't have to." "We know." Angela knelt down so she was eye level with Bull's wheelchair. "But 20 years ago, my husband was in a VA hospital bed in Texas. Cancer. The doctors said he had 3 months. A young sergeant named Thornton spent his own leave time raising money for experimental treatment. Organized fundraisers, called in favors, made things happen." Bull's eyes widened. "Torres? Charlie Torres?" "He lived another 12 years. Angela's voice cracked. 12 years. Watched our grandchildren be born. All because you wouldn't give up on him." She stood and turned to face Mason, her expression hardening into something cold and unforgiving. "So yeah, officer, we had to come, because that's what family does." Sarah Mitchell was still live streaming. Her phone held steady despite the chaos around her. The viewer count on her feed had passed 200,000 and was climbing rapidly. "For those just joining us," Sarah narrated quietly, "you're watching the Tucson VA Medical Center parking lot, where Officer Derek Mason of the Tucson Police Department has called for a tow truck to remove the wheelchair-accessible van of Sergeant William Thornton, a disabled veteran who lost both legs and his left arm in Afghanistan. Members of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club have arrived to show support." In the distance, a tow truck was approaching. The driver, a heavy-set man in his 40s, took one look at the assembled motorcycles and hit his brakes. His door opened. He climbed out slowly, staring at the scene before him. The driver looked at the ocean of leather and chrome surrounding him. "I got a call about a tow? Fraudulent disabled plates?" Hammer stepped forward, his boots heavy on the asphalt. "You see that van over there? The modified one with the wheelchair lift?" The driver nodded nervously. "That van belongs to a man who lost both his legs and most of his arm fighting for this country. A man who saved 17 lives in combat. A man who's being harassed by that cop over there for having suspicious documentation." Hammer paused to let that sink in. "Now, I'm not going to tell you what to do. That's your choice. But I am going to tell you that every single person here," he gestured at the 47 motorcycles and the growing crowd of veterans, "will remember your choice. And we have very long memories." The tow truck driver looked at Mason, then at the assembled bikers, then at Bull sitting quietly in his wheelchair. "Yeah, no," the driver shook his head. "I don't know what's going on here, but I'm not touching that van. This isn't what I signed up for." "You'll tow that vehicle or I'll have your license." Mason's voice cracked with desperation. "Sue me." The driver was already climbing back into his cab. I've got a lawyer brother-in-law. We'll figure it out. The tow truck backed away, turned around, and disappeared down the road. Mason stood alone now, surrounded by hostile faces and recording phones. His patrol car was blocked in by motorcycles. His backup hadn't arrived. His authority had evaporated like morning mist. And in the distance, more vehicles were approaching. News vans, their satellite dishes already extending, their cameras already rolling. Officer Mason, Hammer's voice was deceptively calm. I think it's time we had a conversation about what happens next. Mason's hand trembled over his service weapon. 60 bikers, 30 veterans, hundreds of thousands watching online, news cameras arriving. He was trapped. And for the first time in his 9-year career, Derek Mason understood what it felt like to be truly, completely powerless. Just like all the people he'd bullied and harassed and abused, just like the man in the wheelchair who'd given everything for his country, only to be treated like a criminal. Bull watched this all unfold with the quiet patience of a soldier who'd learned long ago that the most important battles were won through endurance, not violence. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time since Mason had approached his van, Bull allowed himself to feel something other than despair. He felt hope. Mason's radio crackled with static, then a voice cut through. Unit 47, what's your situation? We're getting calls about a disturbance at the VA. His hand trembled as he keyed the mic. Dispatch, I need immediate backup. Multiple individuals surrounding my position. Can you specify the nature of the threat? Mason looked at the wall of leather-clad bikers, at the dozens of veterans with their phones raised, at the news vans setting up their equipment. How was he supposed to explain this? Just send backup. Now. Hammer stepped closer, his boots crunching on the asphalt. You know what I find interesting, officer? Mason's hand moved to his weapon. Stay back. Relax, I'm not going to touch you. Hammer's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm just curious about something. You accused this man of faking his disability, called him a scammer, but here's what I want to know. What makes you such an expert on fake disabilities? The question hung in the air like a blade. Bull watched from his wheelchair, his tactical mind already processing the situation. Hammer wasn't just making conversation. He was probing, testing, looking for something. I don't have to explain myself to you, Mason said, but his voice cracked. No, you don't. Hammer pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. But maybe you can explain this. He turned the screen toward Mason. It showed a Facebook post. A photo of a muscular man in MMA gloves, arms raised in victory inside a fighting cage. The caption read, "Third straight win. Nothing can stop me." The man in the photo was Derek Mason. Interesting picture, Hammer said casually. Posted 3 weeks ago. But according to public records, you've been collecting workers' compensation for a shoulder injury since 2022. An injury so severe you can't perform regular duty. Mason's face went white. Where did you get that? The internet is a wonderful thing. A younger biker approached, laptop in hand. Name's Byte, former military intelligence. Now I do cybersecurity. And brother, you are not good at covering your tracks. Bull felt something shift in his chest. The same feeling he'd had in combat when the tide of battle suddenly turned. That photo is old, Mason stammered. It's from before my injury. Really? Byte tapped his keyboard. Because the metadata says it was taken on October 15th of this year. And here's another one from September. And August. And, oh, look at this. A video from July where you're deadlifting 400 pounds. He turned the laptop around so everyone could see. The video showed Mason in a gym, straining under a loaded barbell, then standing triumphant as the weights crashed down. The timestamp was clearly visible in the corner. That's, Mason's voice failed him. That's not what? Hammer's voice had gone cold. Not you? Not evidence of fraud? Not proof that you've been stealing from taxpayers while accusing a man who actually sacrificed his body for this country of being a fake? The gathered crowd had grown completely silent. Even the news cameras had stopped moving, their operators frozen by what they were witnessing. Sarah Mitchell spoke up, her phone still recording. For everyone watching at home, we're now at over 400,000 viewers. You're seeing evidence that Officer Derek Mason has been committing disability fraud while harassing a legitimate disabled veteran. Mason spun toward her. Turn that off. You're interfering with a police investigation. What investigation? Sarah didn't flinch. You called for a tow truck because you didn't like the way a veteran's permits looked. That's not an investigation. That's harassment. I'm warning you. And I'm ignoring you. Sarah's voice was steady. Just like you ignored every piece of legitimate documentation Sergeant Thornton showed you. Angela Torres moved to stand beside Sarah. You know what I see when I look at you, officer? I see a coward, a man who attacks people he thinks can't fight back, a bully with a badge. You don't know anything about me. I know enough, Angela gestured at Bull. That man spent 22 years serving this country. He's been wounded, decorated, and honored. And you looked at him and saw someone to victimize. What does that say about you? Mason's hand was shaking badly now. His eyes darted between the bikers, the veterans, the cameras, looking for an escape that didn't exist. Backup is coming, he said, but it sounded more like a prayer than a statement. Yeah? Hammer glanced toward the parking lot entrance. I don't see any backup. What I see is more people arriving to support Sergeant Thornton. He was right. Cars were pulling into the lot now. Trucks with veteran bumper stickers, motorcycles that weren't part of the Hells Angels, but whose riders wore patches from other veteran groups. Word was spreading, and people were responding. Bull watched it all with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. He'd spent so many years feeling alone, forgotten, just another broken soldier trying to survive in a world that had moved on without him. But he wasn't alone. He'd never been alone. Sergeant Thornton? A new voice. Bull turned to see a man approaching through the crowd, tall, silver-haired, moving with the precise bearing of a career military officer. Bull's breath caught in his throat. Colonel Drake? Hello, Bull. Colonel Raymond Drake stopped in front of the wheelchair, his dress uniform immaculate despite the Arizona heat. It's been a while. Sir, what are you? Bull couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah called me. Drake's eyes were warm as he looked at his former subordinate. Told me what was happening. I drove straight here from Fort Huachuca. That's over an hour away. 73 minutes at the speed I was going. Drake smiled slightly. Don't tell anyone. I'd hate to get a ticket. The small joke broke something in Bull. He felt tears threatening for the first time since this nightmare began. His commanding officer, the man who'd written his recommendations, who'd visited him at Walter Reed, who'd told him that losing his limbs didn't diminish his service, had dropped everything to come support him. Colonel, Mason stepped forward, trying to regain some authority. I don't know who you are, but this is a police matter. I'm Colonel Raymond Drake, United States Army, currently stationed at Fort Huachuca. Drake's voice had changed completely. Gone was the warmth he'd shown Bull. In its place was the cold steel of a man who'd commanded soldiers in combat. And I know exactly who you are, Officer Mason. I've been briefed on the entire situation. Then you know I'm just doing my job. Your job? Drake took a step closer, and Mason actually backed up. Your job is to protect and serve, not to harass disabled veterans, not to accuse Purple Heart recipients of fraud, not to abuse your authority against the most vulnerable members of our society. His permits look suspicious. His permits are clearly visible and properly displayed. I can see them from here. Drake's voice rose slightly. What I find suspicious, officer, is why a man who's supposedly disabled enough to collect workers' compensation is competing in MMA tournaments and posting videos of himself lifting weights. Mason's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. "I've already made some calls," Drake continued. "Internal Affairs is on their way, as is your chief of police, who I happen to know personally from my time on the Veterans Affairs Advisory Board. He's not happy." The news hit Mason like a physical blow. His face went from white to gray. "You can't," he whispered. "I can't what? Report criminal behavior? Alert the appropriate authorities? Ensure that justice is served?" Drake shook his head slowly. "I've spent my entire career fighting for this country and the men who serve it. You think I'm going to stand by while someone like you victimizes one of my best soldiers?" Hammer approached, standing shoulder to shoulder with Drake. An unusual alliance, a full-bird colonel and the president of a Hells Angels chapter. But in this moment, they were united by something stronger than their differences. "There's more," Hammer said quietly. "Bite's been digging." Drake raised an eyebrow. "More?" 3 DUI arrests, all mysteriously reduced to lesser charges. Hammer's voice was loud enough for the cameras to pick up. 17 formal complaints for excessive force and unprofessional conduct, all dismissed without investigation. A lawsuit settled out of court after he allegedly broke a homeless veteran's arm during an arrest. The crowd's murmur grew into something angrier. "That's lies," Mason's voice had gone shrill. "Those records are supposed to be sealed." "Public records aren't sealed," Bite called out from his position near the motorcycles. "Amazing what you can find if you know where to look. The settlement was for $50,000, by the way, paid by the city, taxpayer money." Bull had remained silent through all of this, watching the man who had humiliated him be slowly destroyed by his own history. He should have felt satisfaction, maybe even joy. Instead, he felt tired. "Colonel," Bull said quietly. "Sir," Drake immediately turned his attention back to Bull. "What do you need?" "I just want to go to my appointment. Dr. Chen is probably wondering where I am." The simple request cut through all the drama and confrontation. Here was a man who'd been attacked, humiliated, threatened with the loss of his independence, and all he wanted was to see his doctor. Drake nodded slowly. "Of course. Officer Mason, are you going to continue preventing Sergeant Thornton from accessing his medical care?" Mason looked around at the wall of hostile faces surrounding him. The cameras, the phones, the colonel in his dress uniform, the bikers in their leather, the veterans with their steady, accusing eyes. His voice broke. "I need to, the tow truck." "The tow truck left," Angela reminded him. "The driver wanted no part of this." "My patrol car is blocked in," Hammer added. "Accidentally, of course. We're just parked legally in a public parking lot." Mason's legs seemed to give out. He sat down heavily on the curb, his head in his hands. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a new sound cut through the silence. Sirens. Multiple sirens, approaching fast. "That'll be internal affairs," Drake said. "And probably your chief." Mason didn't respond. He just sat there, broken. Bull watched him and felt something unexpected stir in his chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but recognition. He'd seen men break before, in combat, in hospitals, in the long, dark nights when the weight of what they'd done, or what had been done to them, became too much to bear. Mason was a bully and a fraud, but he was also a human being who just watched his entire life collapse in less than an hour. "Sergeant Thornton," Sarah approached, lowering her phone for the first time. "We're at 600,000 viewers now. People are asking if you want to say anything." Bull considered the question. 600,000 people watching, waiting to hear from him. "Not yet," he said finally. "Let's see how this plays out first." The first police car entered the parking lot, followed by 2 more. They had to navigate carefully through the maze of motorcycles, eventually parking near the perimeter of the gathered crowd. A man in a suit emerged from the lead car. 50s, salt and pepper hair, the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. He was followed by 2 officers with internal affairs, clearly visible on their badges. "Chief Torres," Drake said, stepping forward to shake his hand, "thank you for coming so quickly." "Colonel Drake," Torres's handshake was firm but brief. His eyes were already scanning the scene, taking in the scope of what had happened. "I've been watching the live stream on my way here. I think I have a general picture, but I'd like to hear it directly." "Of course," Drake gestured toward Bull. "This is Sergeant William Thornton, retired Green Beret, 3 Purple Hearts, lost both legs and his left arm below the elbow in Afghanistan. Officer Mason accused him of fraud and attempted to have his van towed." Torres walked over to Bull's wheelchair, studying him with a cop's experienced eye. Whatever he saw made his expression darken. "Sergeant Thornton, I'm Chief Thomas Torres, Tucson Police Department." He extended his hand and Bull shook it with his remaining hand. "On behalf of my department, I want to apologize for what you've experienced today." "Thank you, Chief. I served too. Gulf War, 2nd Marine Division." Torres straightened slightly. "I know what sacrifice looks like, and I know what disrespect looks like. What happened here today was inexcusable." He turned to face Mason, who was still sitting on the curb, looking like a man watching his own funeral. "Officer Mason, stand up." Mason rose slowly, his legs unsteady. "I've been briefed on your personnel file during my drive here. 17 complaints, 3 DUIs with suspicious dismissals, a settled lawsuit, and now evidence of disability fraud." Torres's voice was cold as winter. "Did you think no one would ever connect the dots?" "Chief, I can explain." "Can you?" Torres stepped closer. "Can you explain why you're collecting disability for a shoulder injury while competing in MMA tournaments? Can you explain why you accused a man who's clearly, obviously, undeniably disabled of faking his condition?" Mason's mouth worked, but no words came out. "I didn't think so." Torres held out his hand. "Badge, weapon, now." "Chief, please." "Now, Officer Mason, or I'll have you arrested on the spot for insubordination." The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Then slowly, Mason reached up and unclipped his badge. His hands shook so badly he nearly dropped it. He placed it in Torres's palm, then drew his service weapon and handed it over as well. "You are suspended indefinitely without pay pending a full investigation," Torres announced, loud enough for all the cameras to hear. "You will surrender your law enforcement credentials to Internal Affairs. You will not contact any witnesses. You will make yourself available for questioning. Is that understood?" Mason nodded weakly. "I asked if that was understood." "Yes, sir." Mason's voice was barely a whisper. "Good." Torres handed the badge and weapon to one of the Internal Affairs officers. "Get him out of here. Back entrance. I don't want any incidents." As Mason was led away, he passed within a few feet of Bull's wheelchair. For a moment, their eyes met. Bull expected to see anger, defiance, maybe even hatred. Instead, he saw nothing, just empty eyes in an empty face. The look of a man who'd already given up. "Wait," the word came from Bull before he even realized he was going to speak. Everyone froze. The Internal Affairs officers, Mason, Torres, the entire crowd. "Sergeant?" Torres asked. Bull wheeled himself closer to Mason, close enough to see the sweat on his forehead, the tremor in his hands, the defeat in his slumped shoulders. "I could have died 100 times in Afghanistan," Bull said quietly. "Every day was a choice. Keep fighting or give up. And every day I chose to fight. Not because I'm brave, not because I'm special, because that's what soldiers do." Mason didn't respond, didn't even seem to be listening. "You're going to face consequences for what you've done. That's justice. But what happens after that, whether you let this destroy you or whether you use it to become something better, that's up to you." Bull paused, searching Mason's empty eyes for any sign of comprehension. "I'm not forgiving you. Maybe I never will. But I'm telling you that the man you are today doesn't have to be the man you are tomorrow. That's a choice too." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then something flickered in Mason's eyes. Not hope exactly, but maybe the faintest recognition that hope might still be possible. "I'm sorry." The words were so quiet that only Bull heard them. "I know." Bull wheeled back. "Now go face what's coming." As Mason was led away, Hammer approached Bull with something like wonder in his eyes. "That was unexpected." "He's still a human being," Bull's voice was tired, "even if he forgot that I was." "You're a better man than me, Bull. I would have let him rot." "No, you wouldn't have." Bull managed a small smile. "That's not what brothers do. We're better than our worst moments. All of us." Chief Torres cleared his throat. "Sergeant Thornton, I'd like to personally escort you to your appointment, and afterward, if you're willing, I'd like to discuss some changes we need to make in how our department interacts with disabled veterans." "I'd like that, Chief." "And," Torres hesitated, "I know this isn't the time or place, but I want you to know, the Tucson Police Department is going to make this right, whatever that looks like." "Making it right isn't about me." Bull gestured at the crowd of veterans still watching. "It's about making sure no veteran ever goes through this again." Torres nodded slowly, respect evident in his expression. "Agreed." As Bull began wheeling toward the VA entrance, something unexpected happened. The Hells Angels members started their motorcycles, the rumble building into a thunder that echoed off the buildings. But they weren't leaving. They were forming two lines, a corridor of chrome and leather leading from Bull's position to the VA entrance. Angela Torres, no relation to the chief, walked alongside Bull. "Honor escort," she explained, "usually reserved for fallen soldiers, but we figured you earned it today." Bull felt his throat tighten. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just let us show you what you mean to us." He wheeled forward, passing between the rows of rumbling motorcycles. 60 bikers standing at attention, their right hands raised in salute. Veterans joining the line, adding their own salutes. Even Chief Torres and Colonel Drake joined in. All for a man in a wheelchair who just wanted to go to his doctor's appointment. Sarah Mitchell walked beside him, still streaming. "For everyone watching," she said softly, "this is what brotherhood looks like. Not just in uniform, not just in combat, but here in a parking lot in Arizona where people came together to protect one of their own." The viewer count on her stream had passed 1 million. At the VA entrance, Dr. Patricia Chen was waiting. A small woman in her 50s, she'd been Bull's prosthetist for over a decade. She'd watched the entire confrontation from her office window. "William," she hurried forward, concern evident in her face. "I saw everything. Are you okay?" "I've been better." Bull glanced back at the honor escort, at the crowd of supporters, at the cameras still rolling. "But I think I'm going to be okay. Your appointment can wait a few more minutes." Bull turned his wheelchair to face the gathered crowd one more time. "I need to say something first." Sarah raised her phone. "Whenever you're ready, Sergeant." Bull took a deep breath. 1 million people watching, waiting to hear what he had to say. "I joined the Army when I was 18 years old," he began. "Spent 22 years serving this country. Lost my legs and my arm in Afghanistan. And you know what? I'd do it all again. Every mission, every sacrifice, because that's what service means." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "What happened today? It hurt. I won't pretend it didn't. Being called a faker, a scammer, having someone try to take away the one thing that lets me live independently. That hurt more than the IED that took my legs." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But what happened after, what all of you did, that's what I'm going to remember. The veterans who stood witness, the nurse who knew my story, the bikers who dropped everything to come support a brother they hadn't seen in years, the colonel who drove over an hour to stand beside me, the chief who chose justice over protecting his own officer." Bull's voice cracked slightly, but he pushed through. "We talk a lot about brotherhood, about loyalty, about taking care of our own. Today I saw what those words actually mean. Not just talk, action. People showing up when it matters. That's the America I fought for. That's the America worth fighting for. He straightened in his wheelchair as much as his damaged body would allow. To every veteran watching this, you're not alone. You're never alone. And to everyone else, remember that the person in the wheelchair, the one with the service dog, the one who walks with a limp or can't meet your eyes because of what they've seen, they gave something for this country. They deserve your respect, not your suspicion. Bull took one last look at the crowd. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a doctor's appointment to get to. I've been waiting 15 years for Dr. Chen to admit my phantom pain is real, and I'm not giving up today. Laughter rippled through the crowd, breaking the tension. Dr. Chen rolled her eyes affectionately. Get in here, you stubborn man. We'll talk about your phantom pain when you stop skipping your physical therapy sessions. As Bull wheeled through the VA doors, Hammer called out one last time. Same time next month? Bull paused, looking back at the sea of faces. Friends, brothers, family he'd found in the most unexpected places. Same time next month, he confirmed. And Hammer, thank you for everything. That's what brothers do, Bull. Hammer's voice carried across the parking lot. That's what brothers do. The doors closed behind Bull, but outside the crowd didn't disperse. They stayed, sharing stories, exchanging phone numbers, forming connections that would last long after this day was forgotten. Because something had changed in that parking lot, something that couldn't be undone. And somewhere across the country, in living rooms and offices and military bases, over 1 million people had just watched it happen. 3 hours after Bull disappeared through the VA doors, the parking lot had transformed into something nobody expected. News trucks from Phoenix, Flagstaff, and Las Vegas had joined the local Tucson affiliates. National networks were picking up the feed: CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, all of them running the same footage. A disabled veteran being harassed, then rescued by an army of bikers and fellow soldiers. Hammer stood near his motorcycle, fielding his 14th phone call of the day. Yeah, he's still inside. Doctor's appointment. No, I don't know when he's coming out. Yes, we're staying until he does. He hung up and turned to Angela. That was a producer from Good Morning America. They want Bull for an interview tomorrow. What did you tell them? Told them to call back when Bull's ready to talk. This is his story, his choice. Angela nodded approvingly. The website is getting hammered. 3 million hits in the last hour. The video's been shared over 200,000 times. Which video? All of them. Angela scrolled through her phone. Sarah's live stream, the clip of Mason being suspended, Bull's speech at the end. People are going crazy. Hammer looked toward the VA entrance. He doesn't know yet about any of this. He will soon enough. Inside the VA, Bull sat in Dr. Chen's examination room, completely unaware of the media frenzy building outside. His appointment had run long, partly because of the delayed start, partly because Dr. Chen had insisted on a full evaluation after the stress of the morning. Your blood pressure is elevated, she noted, frowning at her instruments. Not surprising, given what you've been through. I've had worse days. That's not a comfort, William. Dr. Chen set down her stethoscope. I watched the whole thing from my window. I wanted to come out there, but security wouldn't let anyone leave the building. Probably for the best. It got pretty intense. Pretty intense, Dr. Chen shook her head. A police officer accused you of faking your disability, called you names, tried to tow your van, and you call that pretty intense? Bull shrugged with his remaining arm. I've been shot at by Taliban fighters. This was just a guy with a badge and an attitude. It was assault, harassment, discrimination. Dr. Chen's voice sharpened. It was wrong, William, and you don't have to minimize it. For a long moment, Bull didn't respond. Then slowly, the mask he'd been wearing all morning began to crack. It scared me. The admission came out barely louder than a whisper. Not Mason, not the confrontation, the thought of losing my van. Bull's voice trembled slightly. That van is everything. It's my freedom, my independence. The only way I can still feel like a man instead of a... He couldn't finish the sentence. Dr. Chen moved closer, her professional demeanor softening. Instead of what? A burden. The word hung in the air between them. Margaret used to drive me places before she got sick. She never complained, never made me feel like I was a problem. But I saw it in her eyes sometimes, the exhaustion, the weight of taking care of me. William, when she died, I told myself I'd never be dependent on anyone again. I'd find a way to take care of myself. The van gave me that. Bull's voice broke, and that cop tried to take it away like it was nothing, like I was nothing. Dr. Chen pulled up a chair and sat down facing him. You are not nothing. You are one of the most remarkable people I've ever known. And what happened today doesn't change that, doesn't it? Bull laughed bitterly. I sat there in my wheelchair while other people fought for me. Couldn't stand up, couldn't defend myself, just sat there like a man who's already given more than anyone could ask. Dr. Chen's voice was firm. You didn't need to fight today, William. You've been fighting for 47 years. Today it was someone else's turn to fight for you. Bull wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. When did you become a therapist? About 3 seconds after I met you. Someone had to be. Dr. Chen smiled gently. Now let's talk about your phantom pain. I have some new treatment options I want to discuss. Changing the subject? Absolutely. That's my specialty. Meanwhile, outside the VA, a new development was unfolding. A black SUV with government plates pulled into the parking lot, navigating carefully through the remaining motorcycles. Chief Torres, who had stayed to manage the scene, watched it approach with growing curiosity. The SUV stopped, and a woman in her 60s emerged. Gray hair cut short, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, a suit that screamed federal authority. Chief Torres? She extended her hand. I'm Special Agent Patricia Reyes, FBI, Civil Rights Division. Torres shook her hand, his eyebrows rising. FBI? That was fast. We've been monitoring this situation since it went viral. Reyes glanced around at the cameras, the bikers, the crowd of onlookers. The Bureau takes civil rights violations against veterans seriously, especially when they're broadcast to 3 million people. Officer Mason has already been suspended. I'm aware, but suspension isn't prosecution. Reyes's voice carried the weight of federal authority. We're opening a formal investigation. Officer Mason may be facing federal charges under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. Torres nodded slowly. I expected as much. What do you need from us? Full cooperation, access to Mason's personnel records, body camera footage, witness statements. Reyes paused. And I'd like to speak with Sergeant Thornton when he's available. He's still inside, doctor's appointment. I'll wait. Reyes surveyed the scene once more. This case is going to get a lot of attention, Chief. The kind that ends careers and changes departments. I suggest you get ahead of it. Already working on that. Torres gestured toward the VA entrance. I've asked Colonel Drake to help us develop new training protocols. Sergeant Thornton has agreed to consult. Good. That's exactly the kind of proactive response we want to see. Reyes handed him a business card. Keep me informed of any developments, and tell Sergeant Thornton that the FBI stands with him. As Reyes walked away to make phone calls, Hammer approached Torres. Federal charges? Looks like it. Torres shook his head. Mason's in deeper trouble than I thought. Good. Hammer's voice was flat. He deserves whatever's coming. Maybe. Torres looked toward the VA entrance. But Sergeant Thornton seems to feel differently. That speech he gave, about Mason still having a choice to become better, that surprised me. Bull's a better man than most of us. Hammer's voice softened slightly. He always was. Even at Walter Reed, when he was learning to live without his legs, he spent more time helping other patients than worrying about himself. You knew him then? We were in adjacent rooms for 3 months. I was there for PTSD and some shrapnel removal. He was there learning to walk on prosthetics. Hammer paused, lost in memory. I watched him fall 100 times, 200. Never once heard him complain, just got back up and tried again. Torres was quiet for a moment. What made you join the Hells Angels? After your service, I mean. Brotherhood. Hammer's answer was immediate. The Marines gave me a family. When I got out, I lost that. The Angels gave it back. Even with the reputation, people see leather and tattoos and assume we're criminals. Hammer shrugged. Some of us have records, sure, but most of us are just veterans looking for connection, for purpose, for brothers who understand what we've been through. Today you proved that. Today we showed up, that's all. That's what brothers do. Inside the VA, Bull's appointment was finally wrapping up. Dr. Chen had prescribed a new medication for his phantom pain and scheduled a follow-up for the next week. One more thing, she said as Bull prepared to leave. There are a lot of people waiting for you outside. The bikers, they said they'd stay. Not just the bikers, Dr. Chen hesitated. There are news crews, reporters, federal agents, apparently. Your story has gotten big. Bull felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. I just wanted to go to my appointment. I know. Dr. Chen placed a hand on his shoulder. But sometimes we don't get to choose when the world pays attention. What we do get to choose is how we respond. What would you suggest? Be yourself, tell your truth, and let the people who care about you handle the rest. Dr. Chen smiled. You have more people in your corner than you realize, William. It's time you let yourself see that. Bull nodded slowly, then wheeled himself toward the exit. The automatic doors opened, and he was immediately hit by a wall of sound. Cameras clicking, reporters shouting questions, the rumble of motorcycle engines that had never stopped. Sergeant Thornton, can we get a statement? How do you feel about Officer Mason's suspension? Are you planning to file a lawsuit? Bull raised his hand, and slowly the chaos subsided. I'll answer questions later, he said. Right now, I just want to thank the people who showed up for me today. He wheeled forward, and the crowd parted to let him through. Hammer was waiting by his van, along with Angela, Bite, and dozens of other Hells Angels members. How was your appointment? Hammer asked. Dr. Chen thinks I'm stressed. Can't imagine why. Hammer laughed. Yeah, real mystery. Listen, Bull, there's some people you should talk to. FBI agent, news producers, that kind of thing. Later. Bull looked around at all the faces watching him. First, I want to thank everyone who came. I don't have words for what this means to me. You don't need words, brother. Hammer gripped Bull's shoulder. We got you. That's all that matters. An older woman pushed through the crowd, 70s, white hair, tears streaming down her face. She stopped in front of Bull's wheelchair and just stared at him. Ma'am, Bull asked gently, are you okay? You're William Thornton, her voice shook. The William Thornton. Last time I checked. My husband was in your unit, Michael Roberts. He talked about you all the time. Said you were the best sergeant he ever served under. Bull felt his heart clench. Roberts, yeah, I remember him. Good soldier, how is he? The woman's face crumbled. He passed 3 years ago. Complications from his injuries. I'm so sorry. Don't be. She reached out and gripped Bull's hand. He died knowing he'd serve with honor. That's what you gave him, that sense of honor. He never forgot it. Mrs. Roberts, I've been watching you on the news all morning. Her grip tightened. Watching what that officer did to you. And I kept thinking, my husband would have been so angry. He would have been right there with those bikers, defending you. I believe he would. I'm proud of you, Sergeant Thornton. Michael would be too. She leaned down and kissed his forehead. Thank you for your service. And thank you for being the man my husband always said you were. She walked away before Bull could respond, disappearing into the crowd. Hammer watched her go. That happens a lot? More than you'd think. Bull's voice was rough. The families remember. even when everyone else forgets. We don't forget. Hammer's voice was firm. None of us forget. A commotion near the parking lot entrance drew their attention. A young man in his early 20s was pushing through the crowd, searching frantically. Where is he? Where's Sergeant Thornton? Sarah Mitchell stepped forward, blocking his path. Sir, you need to calm down. You don't understand. I need to see him. The young man's voice cracked. I drove 4 hours to get here. Please. Bull wheeled toward the commotion. What's going on? The young man froze when he saw Bull. Then slowly he dropped to his knees right there in the parking lot. Sergeant Thornton, he was crying now. You don't remember me. I was just a kid, but you saved my father's life. Bull studied the young man's face, searching his memory. Who's your father? Jason Wheeler. He was in your convoy, the one that got hit. The world seemed to stop. Bull remembered Jason Wheeler. Remembered the moment the IED exploded. Remembered dragging Wheeler's unconscious body out of the burning wreckage while his own legs were bleeding, shattered, useless. Jason made it home? Because of you. The young man wiped his face. He told me the story 1,000 times, how you pulled him out even though you were injured, how you wouldn't leave anyone behind. I was just doing my job. You gave me a father. The young man's voice broke completely. I was 8 years old when he came home. I got 16 more years with him because of you. I got to have a dad at my graduation, at my wedding. He met his granddaughter because of you. Bull felt something break inside him. All the years of survivor's guilt, all the nights wondering if he could have done more, all the weight of the men he couldn't save. And here was proof that some of them had made it, had lived full lives, had families who loved them. What's your name, son? Thomas. Thomas Wheeler. Thomas. Bull reached out his hand. It's good to meet you. Thomas took his hand and held it like a lifeline. I watched what happened today, saw that cop treating you like dirt, and I got so angry, Sergeant, so angry that anyone could treat someone like you that way. It's over now. No, it's not. Thomas's grip tightened. I work for a law firm in Phoenix, civil rights cases, and I want you to know, if you want to sue, if you want to take this further, we'll represent you for free, pro bono. It would be an honor. Bull was quiet for a long moment. I appreciate that, Thomas, but let me think about it. Right now, I'm just trying to process everything that's happened. Of course, take all the time you need. Thomas pulled a business card from his pocket. My number, day or night, anything you need. Bull took the card, turning it over in his hand. Your father would be proud of you. I learned from his example, which means I learned from yours. Thomas stood, wiping his eyes. Thank you, Sergeant, for everything. As Thomas walked away, Hammer let out a low whistle. Bull, do you realize what just happened? A young man came to thank me. A civil rights lawyer just offered to represent you for free. Hammer shook his head in disbelief. This thing is bigger than any of us realized. Colonel Drake approached, his phone pressed to his ear. He ended the call and turned to Bull with an expression that was hard to read. What is it, sir? Bull asked. That was the Pentagon, specifically the Secretary of the Army's office. Bull felt his stomach drop. What do they want? They want to expedite your Medal of Honor nomination. Drake's voice was thick with emotion. The secretary himself called, said that watching today's events reminded him why that medal exists, to honor soldiers who demonstrate extraordinary courage and sacrifice. I haven't done anything extraordinary today. I just sat in my wheelchair. You showed grace under pressure. You spoke words of dignity when you had every right to be bitter. And you reminded the country what real service looks like. Drake placed a hand on Bull's shoulder. That's extraordinary, Bull, whether you see it or not. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just keep being who you are. Drake smiled. That's more than enough. Special Agent Reyes approached, her credentials visible. Sergeant Thornton, I'm Patricia Reyes, FBI Civil Rights Division. Do you have a moment? Bull looked at the crowd still surrounding him, the cameras still rolling, the faces still watching. Can we do this somewhere private? Of course. Reyes gestured toward a quiet corner near the VA entrance. This won't take long. They moved away from the crowd, Hammer following at a respectful distance. Reyes waited until they had some privacy before speaking. The Bureau is opening a formal investigation into Officer Mason's conduct, she explained. Based on the evidence we've gathered, the videos, the witness statements, his history of complaints, we believe this rises to the level of federal civil rights violations. What does that mean for me? It means we'll need your cooperation, a formal statement, possibly testimony if this goes to trial. Reyes paused. It also means Mason could face significant prison time. Bull absorbed this information in silence. I know you offered him words of understanding this morning, Reyes continued. That was remarkable, Sergeant. But I want you to understand what he did wasn't just wrong, it was criminal. And people who abuse their authority to victimize the vulnerable need to face consequences. I understand that. Do you want to proceed with the federal case? Bull thought about Mason's empty eyes as he was led away. Thought about the young man's words, that he'd learned from his father's example, which meant he'd learn from Bull's. What kind of example did he want to set? Yes, Bull said finally. I want to proceed, not for revenge, not for punishment, but because what happened to me happens to other veterans every day. And if my case can change that, even a little, then it's worth pursuing. Reyes nodded with respect. That's exactly the right reason, Sergeant. I'll be in touch with next steps. She walked away, leaving Bull alone with Hammer. You okay? Hammer asked. I don't know what I am right now. Bull looked up at the sky, squinting against the afternoon sun. This morning I was just a guy going to a doctor's appointment. Now I'm in the middle of a federal case, a Medal of Honor nomination, and whatever else is coming. You're still the same guy. Hammer crouched down so they were eye level. That's what matters. Everything else is just noise. Loud noise. Yeah, Hammer grinned. But we've heard louder. A child's voice cut through the moment. Mommy, is that the soldier from the video? Bull turned to see a little boy, maybe 7 years old, tugging at his mother's hand. The mother looked embarrassed, trying to quiet her son. Sorry, she said. He's been watching the news all day. He insisted we come. It's okay, Bull smiled at the boy. What's your name? Tyler. The boy stepped forward, suddenly shy. Are you really a Green Beret? I was, a long time ago. My grandpa was in the Army too. He has a flag in his room. Your grandpa sounds like a hero. He says you're a hero. Tyler reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. I made this for you. He handed Bull the paper. It was a drawing, crayon and marker, the work of a child. It showed a man in a wheelchair surrounded by motorcycles, with the words, "Thank you," written in wobbly letters across the top. Bull stared at the drawing for a long moment. Tyler, this is the best gift anyone's ever given me. Really? Really. Bull folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into his pocket, close to his heart. I'm going to keep this forever. Tyler beamed. Then without warning, he rushed forward and hugged Bull around the shoulders. Bull froze for just a second. Then his arm came up, wrapping around the small body pressed against him. He couldn't remember the last time someone had hugged him. Thank you for being brave, Tyler whispered. Thank you for reminding me why it matters, Bull whispered back. Tyler's mother was crying when her son finally let go. I'm sorry, she said again. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize. Bull's voice was steady, but his eyes were bright. He just gave me more than he'll ever know. As Tyler and his mother walked away, Bull looked around at the scene surrounding him. The bikers who had come to his defense, the veterans who had stood witness, the strangers who had become family in the span of a morning. He had started this day alone. He wasn't alone anymore. Hammer's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and let out a low laugh. What? Bull asked. Remember that GoFundMe someone mentioned earlier? Vaguely. It just passed $2 million. Hammer showed him the screen. For disabled veteran services. In your name. Bull stared at the number, unable to process what he was seeing. $2 million. Because a cop had tried to tow his van. This is insane, he murmured. This is just the beginning, brother. Hammer pocketed his phone. This is just the beginning. $2 million became $3 million by sunset. Bull sat in his van in the VA parking lot, unable to bring himself to drive home. The engine was running, the air conditioning humming, but he just sat there, staring at his phone screen as the numbers kept climbing. A knock on his window made him jump. Sarah Mitchell stood outside, her face soft with concern. You've been sitting here for 20 minutes. Everyone's worried. Bull lowered the window. I don't know how to process this. The money? Everything. He gestured vaguely at the world beyond his windshield. This morning I was a guy going to a doctor's appointment. Now there's a federal investigation, a Medal of Honor nomination, $3 million raised in my name, and I still haven't eaten lunch. Sarah laughed despite herself. Well, at least we can fix the lunch problem. Hammer's organizing a dinner at the VFW hall. Everyone wants you there. I'm not sure I can face more people right now. You don't have to face them, Sarah's voice gentled. You just have to let them support you. There's a difference. Bull considered this for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Okay, but I'm driving myself. I need a few minutes alone first. Take all the time you need. Sarah stepped back from the van. We'll be waiting. She walked away, and Bull watched her go. Then he put the van in gear and drove. Not toward the VFW hall. Not yet. He drove to the cemetery. Margaret's grave was on a hillside overlooking the city. Bull had chosen the spot himself, knowing how much she loved sunsets. He parked in the accessible space near the entrance and made his way up the path, his wheelchair's motor whining against the incline. When he reached her headstone, he stopped. Hey, sweetheart. The words came out rough. He hadn't visited in 3 weeks, longer than usual. Life had gotten busy, and then today had happened. And now, you wouldn't believe the day I've had. He told her everything. The confrontation with Mason, the arrival of the bikers, the federal agent, the little boy with his crayon drawing, all of it. I wish you were here, he said finally. You always knew what to say when things got complicated, and this is pretty complicated. The wind rustled through the grass, and for a moment, Bull could almost hear her voice. You're going to be fine, William. You always are. I don't feel fine. I feel overwhelmed. That's because you're trying to carry it all yourself. Let people help. I've never been good at that. I know, it's one of your most annoying qualities. Bull laughed, even as tears slipped down his cheeks. God, I miss you. He sat there until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Then he wiped his face, took a deep breath, and headed for the VFW hall. The parking lot was full when he arrived. Cars, trucks, motorcycles, more vehicles than Bull had ever seen at the VFW. He had to park near the back, and by the time he reached the entrance, his arms were burning from wheeling himself across the uneven asphalt. Hammer met him at the door. You made it. I needed a detour. Margaret? Bull nodded, surprised that Hammer remembered. I visit my wife's grave every Sunday, Hammer said quietly. Divorced, not dead, but same idea. The conversations help. They do. Hammer held the door open. Ready? Not even a little. Good, that's the best way to walk into a room full of people who love you. Bull wheeled inside, and the noise hit him like a wave. Conversations, laughter, music from a jukebox in the corner. The room was packed, easily 200 people, maybe more. And when they saw him, they started to applaud. Bull froze. The applause grew louder, became a standing ovation. People he'd never met were clapping for him. Veterans in their uniforms, bikers in their leather, families with children, all of them on their feet, honoring him. Bull's voice caught. I don't deserve this. Yeah, you do. Hammer's hand was firm on his shoulder. You absolutely do. The applause went on for nearly 2 minutes. When it finally died down, Colonel Drake stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sergeant William Bull Thornton, one of the finest soldiers I've ever had the privilege to serve with. Another wave of applause. Bull raised his hand, asking for quiet. I don't know what to say. His voice was rough. I really don't. This morning, I was ready to give up, to let that officer take my van and just accept it. Because I'm tired. I've been tired for a long time. The room was silent now, hanging on every word. But then something happened. People showed up. Strangers became friends. Enemies became teachers. And I remembered something I'd forgotten. Bull paused, collecting himself. I remembered that I'm not alone. None of us are. Even when it feels like the world has forgotten us, there are people who remember. People who care. People who will show up when it matters. He looked around the room, making eye contact with as many faces as he could. That's what today taught me. Not that justice prevails, though it sometimes does. Not that good triumphs over evil, though we hope it will. But that connection matters. That brotherhood is real. That the bonds we forge in service, in any kind of service, can sustain us through the darkest times. Bull's voice strengthened as he continued. So thank you, all of you, for reminding an old soldier that his fight isn't over, that there's still work to do, and that he doesn't have to do it alone. The applause this time was different, softer, more reverent. People weren't just clapping, they were acknowledging a truth they all understood. After the speech, Bull was swarmed with well-wishers, handshakes, hugs, phone numbers pressed into his palm. It was overwhelming, but somehow not suffocating. These people didn't want anything from him. They just wanted to connect. An hour into the event, a young woman approached him. She was maybe 30, with dark hair and nervous eyes. Sergeant Thornton? I'm sorry to bother you. You're not bothering me. What's your name? Emily Mason. Bull felt the world tilt slightly. Mason? Derek Mason is my brother. Emily's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I know I shouldn't be here. I know what he did. But I had to come. I had to explain. Every muscle in Bull's body tensed. He was aware of Hammer moving closer, ready to intervene. Explain what? Emily's eyes filled with tears. He wasn't always like this. When we were kids, he was kind, protective. He used to stand up for me when other kids bullied me about my weight. What happened to him? Our father happened. Emily's voice cracked. He was a cop too, violent, abusive. Derek took the worst of it, trying to protect me and our mom. And somewhere along the way, he turned into the thing he hated. Bull studied her face, seeing the pain there, the shame, the desperate need to make sense of something senseless. Why are you telling me this? Because I don't want you to think he's a monster. Emily wiped her eyes. He did monstrous things. I know that. What he did to you was inexcusable. But there's a human being under there, a broken one, and I keep hoping what? That he can be fixed. Emily's voice was barely audible. That what you said to him about not being defined by his worst moments, that it got through somehow. Bull was quiet for a long moment. The room around them seemed to fade away. I don't know if your brother can be fixed, Emily. That's not my call. But I know that people can change. I've seen it happen. I've experienced it myself. You? When I lost my legs, I wanted to die. Bull's voice was steady, but his eyes were distant. I spent 6 months at Walter Reed convincing myself that life wasn't worth living anymore, that I was broken beyond repair. What changed? Someone believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Bull thought of Margaret, of Dr. Chen, of the soldiers he'd served with. They saw something worth saving when I could only see wreckage. And eventually, I started to see it too. Emily was crying openly now. I want that for Derek. I know he doesn't deserve it. I know he hurt you, but he's still my brother. Then don't give up on him. Bull reached out and touched her hand. But also, don't make excuses for him. The best thing you can do for someone you love is hold them accountable while still loving them. That's the hardest kind of love, but it's the only kind that changes people. Thank you, Emily squeezed his hand. I'm so sorry for what he did. I know you are, and I appreciate you coming here. That took courage. Emily nodded, then disappeared into the crowd. Hammer watched her go. You okay? I don't know. Bull shook his head slowly. I just comforted the sister of the man who tried to destroy me. Is that strength or insanity? Both, probably. Hammer's voice was warm. But that's what makes you who you are, Bull. You see people, not categories. Humans, not enemies. It's exhausting. I imagine it is. The evening continued. Food was served, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, cornbread, all the comfort food of Bull's childhood. He ate more than he had in months, surrounded by laughter and conversation. Around 8 o'clock, Chief Torres arrived. He made his way through the crowd to Bull's table, his expression serious. Sergeant Thornton, I'm sorry to interrupt. Chief, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong exactly, Torres hesitated. But there's been a development. I thought you should know before it hits the news. Bull's stomach tightened. What kind of development? Derek Mason attempted suicide in his holding cell 2 hours ago. The noise of the room seemed to vanish. Bull heard nothing but the pounding of his own heart. Is he alive? Yes, they got to him in time. He's under psychiatric observation now. Torres's voice was heavy. He left a note. It was addressed to you. To me? Torres pulled an envelope from his pocket. The original is evidence, but I had a copy made. You don't have to read it, but I thought you should have the choice. Bull took the envelope. It felt heavier than paper should. Thank you, Chief. Torres nodded and withdrew, leaving Bull alone with the letter. Hammer appeared at his side. You don't have to read that. I know. It might make things worse. It might. Bull stared at the envelope. But I've never been one to look away from hard things. He opened the letter. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible in places. Bull had to read some sections twice to understand them. Sergeant Thornton, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. What I did to you was unforgivable, and I knew it was wrong even while I was doing it. You asked me once what I knew about guys like you. The answer is nothing. I know nothing about real sacrifice, nothing about real courage, nothing about what it costs to serve your country. I spent my whole life pretending to be something I'm not. A tough cop, a disabled veteran of the job, a man worth respecting. But I'm none of those things. I'm a fraud, just like you said, just like everyone saw. When you told me I didn't have to be defined by my worst moments, I wanted to believe you. I wanted to think there was still a chance for me to become something better. But I looked at myself, really looked, and all I saw was rot, corruption, everything I hated about my father staring back at me from the mirror. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did to you. I'm sorry for all the people I hurt over the years. I'm sorry for being the kind of man who tears others down to feel powerful. If I had half your courage, maybe things could be different. But I don't. I never did. You were right about one thing, though. Grace transforms. I just wish I could have transformed into something worth saving. Derek Mason Bull read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. What did it say? Hammer asked quietly. He's a broken man looking for a way out. Bull's voice was distant. And he thinks death is the only door. That's not on you. Maybe not. Bull looked toward the exit. But maybe I can help anyway. Bull, no. You don't owe that man anything. This isn't about what I owe him. Bull began wheeling toward the door. It's about who I want to be. Where are you going? The hospital, if they'll let me see him. Hammer caught up to him, placing a hand on his wheelchair. Bull, think about this. The man tried to destroy your life 12 hours ago. Now you want to visit him in the psych ward? I want to tell him something. What? Bull paused, looking up at his friend. That grace isn't about deserving. It's about receiving. And that the door he's looking for, the way out of his pain, it exists. It's just not the door he thinks it is. Hammer stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly, he released a wheelchair. I'm coming with you. You don't have to. Yeah, Hammer's voice was thick. I do. They left the VFW hall together, riding through the darkness toward the hospital where Derek Mason lay under suicide watch. The psychiatric unit was on the 4th floor. A nurse tried to stop them at the entrance. Sir, visiting hours are over, and this patient isn't cleared for visitors anyway. My name is William Thornton. I'm the veteran he harassed today. Bull kept his voice calm. I'm also the person his suicide note was addressed to. Please check with your supervisor. The nurse hesitated, then picked up a phone. A brief conversation followed. Then she hung up and looked at Bull with something like wonder. Dr. Patterson says you can have 15 minutes, but his condition is fragile. Any sign of agitation and we'll have to ask you to leave. Understood. They were escorted down a hallway to a locked room. Through the small window, Bull could see Mason lying on a bed, his wrists bandaged, his face turned toward the wall. I'll wait here, Hammer said. This is something you need to do alone. Bull nodded, then wheeled himself inside. Mason didn't turn at the sound of the door, didn't acknowledge Bull's presence at all. I got your letter. Still nothing. You're wrong, you know, about being beyond saving. Mason's voice was raw, barely a whisper. How would you know? Because I've been where you are. Bull wheeled closer to the bed. Not the exact same place, but close enough. I spent months at Walter Reed wishing I'd died in that explosion, convinced that what was left of me wasn't worth keeping alive. That's different. You're a hero. I'm a man who got lucky and unlucky in equal measure. Bull's voice was gentle. I survived when others didn't, lost pieces of myself that I'll never get back, and spent years trying to figure out if what remained was enough to build a life on. Mason finally turned to look at him. His eyes were red, hollow, empty of everything except pain. Why are you here? Because you need someone to tell you the truth. And the truth is this. Bull leaned forward. What you did was wrong. The harassment, the fraud, the abuse of power, all of it was wrong, and there will be consequences. That's justice, and it's necessary. I know. But here's the other truth. Bull's voice softened. You are not your worst moments. You are not the sum of your failures. You are a human being who made terrible choices, and now you have a chance to make different ones. What kind of different choices can I make from a prison cell? You'd be surprised. Bull thought of his time at Walter Reed, the dark nights, the gradual dawn. Prison doesn't have to be an end. It can be a beginning, a place to face what you've done, understand why you did it, and commit to becoming someone better. You make it sound easy. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do. Bull's voice was firm. But it's possible. I've seen it happen. I've lived it. Mason was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, tears began to slide down his cheeks. My sister came to see me earlier, told me about the VFW dinner, said you were kind to her. She loves you, that's not nothing. I don't deserve her love. Love isn't about deserving. Bull reached out and touched Mason's arm, the first voluntary physical contact between them. It's about choosing. Your sister chooses to love you despite what you've done. The question is whether you'll choose to honor that love by fighting to become worthy of it. Mason stared at Bull's hand on his arm. Why don't you hate me? Because hate is heavy. I carried it for years after my injury. Hated the Taliban, hated God, hated myself for surviving, and all that hate did was poison me. What made you let it go? A woman who loved me anyway, and a realization. Bull met Mason's eyes. I realized that forgiveness isn't about letting the other person off the hook. It's about releasing myself from the prison of my own anger, choosing freedom over bondage. I don't think I'm strong enough for that kind of freedom. You don't have to be strong enough today. Bull squeezed his arm gently. You just have to stay alive. That's all. One day at a time, one breath at a time, and eventually the strength will come. The door opened. A nurse appeared. I'm sorry, Sergeant Thornton. Time's up. Bull nodded, then turned back to Mason. I'm going to leave you my phone number, not because I want to be your friend, not because I've forgiven everything, but because I believe that everyone deserves at least one person who picks up when they call. He pulled a card from his pocket, one of the many he'd been given that day, and wrote his number on the back. If you ever find yourself back on that edge, call me first. Promise me. Mason took the card with trembling fingers. Why? Why would you do this for me? Because someone did it for me once. Bull began wheeling toward the door. And I'm still here because of it. He paused at the threshold, looking back one last time. Grace transforms, Mason, but only if you let it. Then he was gone, leaving Derek Mason alone with a phone number and a choice. In the hallway, Hammer was waiting. His face was unreadable. You gave him your number. I did. After everything he did to you. After everything. Bull continued wheeling toward the elevator. That's what grace means, Hammer. It's never deserved. It's just given. Hammer was quiet as they waited for the elevator. When it arrived and they were inside, he finally spoke. You're a better man than me, Bull. No, Bull shook his head. I'm just a man who's been broken enough to understand how it feels, and who knows that sometimes the only way out of the darkness is for someone to leave a light on. The elevator doors opened, and they emerged into the night. Hammer's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and stopped walking. Bull. What? The GoFundMe just hit $5 million. Bull closed his eyes. $5 million for disabled veterans services because a corrupt cop had tried to tow his van. This is insane. No, Hammer's voice was thick with emotion. This is grace, just like you said. Grace transforming the worst day of your life into something that will help thousands of people. Bull sat in the darkness, surrounded by the sounds of the city, and felt something shift inside him. Something that had been broken for a very long time. Take me home, Hammer. You sure? The party's probably still going at the VFW. I'm sure. Bull smiled tiredly. I think I've had enough transformation for one day. Hammer laughed and started pushing Bull's wheelchair toward the parking lot. Above them, the stars burned cold and distant. But for the first time in years, Bull didn't feel alone beneath them. He felt found. 6 months later, Bull stood at a podium in Washington, D.C. Not sat, stood. The new prosthetic legs, paid for by the GoFundMe that had eventually reached $12 million, allowed him to stand for short periods. Dr. Chen had called it a miracle of modern engineering. Bull called it a second chance. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice echoed through the chamber, the President of the United States. Bull watched as the most powerful man in the world entered the room, flanked by Secret Service agents and followed by a procession of military brass. The East Room of the White House was packed. Senators, generals, veterans, journalists. And in the front row, wearing their leather vests with quiet pride, sat 12 members of the Arizona Desert Chapter of the Hells Angels. Hammer caught Bull's eye and gave him a small nod. The president approached the podium, his expression solemn. We gather today to honor a man who embodies the highest ideals of service, sacrifice, and grace under pressure. Bull's heart pounded. Even after everything, the media attention, the congressional testimony, the legislation that now bore his name, he still couldn't quite believe this was happening. Sergeant William Thornton didn't just serve his country on the battlefield. He served it again when he was attacked in a VA parking lot. and he served it once more when he offered compassion to the very man who had wronged him. The president paused, letting the words sink in. That is the kind of courage we honor today. Not just the courage to fight, but the courage to forgive. The president turned to face Bull directly. Sergeant Thornton, it is my privilege to present you with the Congressional Medal of Honor, our nation's highest award for valor, in recognition of your extraordinary heroism during Operation Enduring Freedom and your continued service to the veteran community. The medal was heavier than Bull expected, gold and blue, hanging from a ribbon that seemed to carry the weight of every soldier who had worn it before him. This medal belongs to everyone who showed up that day, Bull said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. To the bikers who blocked the exits, to the veterans who stood witness, to the nurse who remembered, to the strangers who became family. He looked out at the audience, finding faces he knew. Hammer, Angela, Colonel Drake, Sarah Mitchell, Thomas Wheeler, even Emily Mason sitting quietly in the back, her eyes red but hopeful. And it belongs to every veteran who's ever been told they're not enough, who's been doubted, dismissed, or forgotten. You are enough. You've always been enough, and this country owes you more than it can ever repay. The applause that followed was thunderous. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Bull was swarmed with dignitaries wanting to shake his hand, journalists wanting quotes, politicians wanting photo opportunities. He endured it all with practiced patience, but his eyes kept drifting toward the exit. Hammer finally rescued him. "Come on, brother, let's get some air." They slipped out onto a balcony overlooking the White House lawn. The spring air was cool, carrying the scent of cherry blossoms. "Hell of a day," Hammer said. "Hell of a year. You earned this, Bull, every bit of it." "Did I?" Bull looked down at the medal around his neck. "Sometimes I wonder if this is all happening to someone else. Some other William Thornton who didn't spend 20 years feeling sorry for himself." "That's survivor's guilt talking." Hammer's voice was gentle. "And it's bullshit. You survived for a reason. Today proved that." Bull was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question that had been weighing on him for weeks. "Have you heard from him? Mason?" Hammer nodded slowly. "Got a letter last month. He's doing the work. Therapy, addiction counseling, completed a victim impact program. Says he thinks about what you told him every day." "Is he getting out soon?" "Another 18 months, minimum. Federal charges don't come with early release." Hammer paused. "He asked about you, wanted to know if you were okay." "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that you're changing the world one speech at a time." Hammer's voice softened. "He cried when I told him about the Medal of Honor nomination. Said he was glad something good came out of the worst thing he ever did." Bull absorbed this information in silence. The man who had tried to destroy him, finding redemption in a prison cell. The hatred that could have consumed them both, transformed into something resembling healing. "Grace is strange," Bull said finally. "How so?" "It never goes where you expect. I thought that day at the VA would be the end of something. Turned out it was the beginning." A commotion inside drew their attention. Bull wheeled back into the reception to find a crowd gathered around a television screen. "What's happening?" Sarah Mitchell appeared at his side, her face alight with excitement. "The vote just came in. The Thornton-Jensen Act passed the Senate, 93-7. Bull felt his breath catch. The legislation he'd helped craft, protections for disabled veterans, penalties for harassment, mandatory training for law enforcement, was now law. "It passed?" "It passed." Sarah was crying now. "Bull, do you understand what this means? Every veteran in America is safer because of what you went through." Colonel Drake pushed through the crowd, his normally stoic face split by a rare smile. "Congratulations, Sergeant. You just changed the country." "We changed it," Bull corrected. "All of us. Together." The celebration continued late into the evening, but eventually the crowds thinned, the cameras retreated, and Bull found himself alone with the people who mattered most. Hammer, Angela, Sarah, Colonel Drake, Thomas Wheeler, a handful of others who had been there from the beginning. "What now?" Angela asked. "You've got the medal. You've got the law. What's next for Bull Thornton?" Bull had been thinking about this question for weeks. The answer had come to him slowly, in fragments, until it finally crystallized into something clear. "I want to build something. A place where veterans can come when they're struggling. Not just a hotline or a support group. A community. A brotherhood. Like what we found in that parking lot, but permanent." "You're talking about the foundation," Hammer said. The William Thornton Foundation for Veteran Services had been established 3 months ago, funded by the GoFundMe money and a flood of donations that continue to pour in. "I'm talking about more than that." Bull's eyes were bright with vision. "I'm talking about a network, chapters across the country, veterans helping veterans, bikers, soldiers, civilians who care, anyone who's willing to show up when it matters." "Like a franchise of guardian angels," Sarah said slowly. "Exactly. We call the hotline, and within an hour someone's there, in person, ready to help." Bull looked around the room. "That's what saved me that day. Not the media attention, not the federal investigation. People showing up, being present, refusing to let me face it alone." "That's ambitious," Colonel Drake said. "It would take years to build, millions of dollars, thousands of volunteers." "We've already got the start of all three." Bull's voice was firm. "And I'm not in a hurry. This is my life's work now, the thing I was saved to do." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Hammer stepped forward. "I'm in. The angels will be your backbone. Every chapter we've got." "Me too," Angela added. "I'll handle the administrative side. Someone needs to keep you organized." "I can help with legal structure," Thomas Wheeler offered. "Pro bono, like I promised." "And I'll handle media relations," Sarah said. "Make sure your story keeps reaching people who need to hear it." One by one, they committed. Colonel Drake pledged military connections. Others offered expertise, time, money, whatever they had to give. Bull felt something warm spreading through his chest. Not pride, something deeper. Belonging. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "All of you." "Don't thank us yet," Hammer grinned. "We haven't done the hard part." "What's the hard part?" "Actually making it work," Hammer clapped him on the shoulder. "But if anyone can do it, Bull, it's you." 2 months later, Bull returned to Tucson. The VA Medical Center looked the same as it always had. Same parking lot, same entrance, same handicapped spaces near the door. But there was something new. A bronze plaque had been installed in the concrete, marking the exact spot where Bull had parked on that fateful day. He wheeled up to it and read the words engraved there. "Sergeant William Bull Thornton Memorial Space. Dedicated to all disabled veterans who served twice, once in war and every day thereafter in peace. Honor is not given. It is earned and defended. Established by the Tucson Police Department, the Arizona Desert Chapter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, and grateful citizens who witnessed grace under fire." Bull traced the letters with his fingers, feeling the weight of everything they represented. "You okay?" He turned to find Dr. Chen approaching, her white coat fluttering in the breeze. "I'm okay. Better than okay, actually." "Good, because you're late for your appointment." She smiled. "Some things never change." "Some things do." Bull gestured at the plaque. "Did you know about this?" "I helped design it." Dr. Chen's eyes were warm. "It was Chief Torres's idea, actually. He wanted something permanent, something that would remind people what happened here and why it mattered." "Torres did this?" "He's changed since that day, William. The whole department has. The training program you helped develop, it's made a real difference. Complaints against officers are down 40%. Veteran satisfaction with police interactions is up." "That's good to hear." "It's more than good. It's transformative. Dr. Chen reached out and squeezed his arm. You did that. You and the people who stood with you. They made their way inside, falling into the familiar rhythm of medical appointments, in test results, in treatment plans. But something was different now. Bull didn't feel like a patient. He felt like a partner. After the appointment, he found Hammer waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his motorcycle. How'd it go? Clean bill of health. Dr. Chen says my phantom pain is actually improving. No kidding. What changed? Bull thought about it. Purpose, maybe. Having something to focus on besides my own problems. Funny how that works. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching other veterans come and go from the VA entrance. Got some news, Hammer said eventually. The Phoenix chapter wants to host you next month. Big rally, 300 riders expected. For what? To launch the Guardian Angels program officially. First chapter outside of Tucson. Hammer's voice carried quiet pride. We're really doing this, Bull. Building something that matters. We are. You know what the best part is? Hammer turned to face him. It's not the organization. It's not the money or the media or any of that. It's the stories. What stories? The veterans we've already helped. The guy in Flagstaff who was about to lose his house until we showed up. The woman in Phoenix who was being harassed by her landlord. The kid in Yuma who couldn't get his VA benefits processed. Hammer's voice thickened. They all have the same thing in common. What's that? They thought they were alone, and we proved they weren't. Bull felt tears threatening, but he didn't fight them. Not anymore. That's what this was always about, he said. Not me, not my story. The thousands of stories that will never make the news. The quiet battles fought in the dark. The veterans who need someone to show up. And now someone will. Hammer gripped his shoulder. Because of you. Because of us. They rode out of the parking lot together. Bull in his van, Hammer on his motorcycle. A strange pair. A Green Beret and a biker. A Medal of Honor recipient and a former outlaw. Brothers. 6 months after that, on the 1-year anniversary of the incident, Bull received an unexpected visitor. He was at the Foundation headquarters, a converted warehouse that now housed offices, meeting rooms, and a call center that fielded over 1,000 calls a month. The operation had grown beyond anything he'd imagined, with chapters in 12 states and more launching every week. Sergeant Thornton? The receptionist's voice came through the intercom. There's someone here to see you. He says his name is Derek Mason. Bull's hand froze over the paperwork he'd been signing. Send him in. The door opened, and Mason entered. He looked different, smaller somehow, though he'd actually gained weight in prison. His eyes had lost their predatory edge, replaced by something softer, something wounded but healing. Sergeant Thornton, Mason's voice was barely above a whisper. Thank you for seeing me. Sit down, Mason. He sat, perching nervously on the edge of the chair, like a child called to the principal's office. I got out last week, Mason said. Early release for good behavior and completion of rehabilitation programs. First thing I did was come here. Why? Because I needed to see you, face to face, to tell you something I couldn't say in a letter. Bull waited. Mason took a deep breath. You saved my life, not just in the hospital that night, though that too, but everything after. The phone number you left, the call I made when I was at my lowest, the volunteer who came to visit me every week because you asked them to. I just made the connection. Other people did the work. You started it. Mason's eyes glistened. You had every right to hate me, to want me destroyed. Instead, you offered grace. And that grace, it broke something in me, something that needed to be broken so something better could grow. What are you going to do now? I'm not sure yet. Can't be a cop anymore, obviously, but I've been training as a counselor, specifically for people who've abused their power and want to change. Mason's voice steadied. I figured who better to help than someone who's lived it. Bull studied the man in front of him. The shell of the bully remained, but inside, Something new was emerging. "There's an opening in our outreach program," Bull heard himself say. "It's not glamorous, mostly phone work. Following up with veterans who've called in, making sure they're connected with resources." Mason's eyes widen. "You'd let me work here? After everything?" "I'd let you prove yourself here." Bull's voice was firm. "One day at a time, one call at a time. No special treatment, no shortcuts. You'd have to earn every ounce of trust." "I understand. And if you ever fall back into old patterns, you're gone. No second chances on that." "I understand," Mason repeated. Bull extended his hand. "Then welcome to the Guardian Angels, Mason. Don't make me regret this." Mason took his hand, gripping it tightly. "I won't, Sergeant. I swear on everything I have left. I won't." Later that evening, Bull sat alone in his office, processing what he'd done. Through the window, he could see the parking lot where Hammer's motorcycle was parked next to Angela's truck, next to Sarah's car, next to a dozen other vehicles belonging to people who had found purpose in this place. His phone buzzed. A text from Emily Mason. "Thank you for everything. You gave my brother back to me." Bull typed a reply. "He gave himself back. I just opened the door." Another text, this one from Hammer. "Heard you hired the cop. You're either crazy or a saint. Probably both." Bull smiled. Definitely both. A knock at his door. He looked up to find a young woman standing in the doorway, maybe 25, military bearing, uncertain eyes. "Excuse me, are you Sergeant Thornton?" "I am. What can I do for you?" I'm not sure where to start," her voice cracked. "I just got back from Afghanistan. My husband left me while I was deployed. The VA is jerking me around on my benefits. My landlord is trying to evict me, and I don't know what to do." Bull wheeled around his desk, approaching her with the same calm steadiness he'd learned on 100 battlefields. "What's your name?" Jessica Torres." She wiped her eyes. "No relation to the chief before you ask." "Jessica, I want you to listen to me very carefully." Bull's voice was gentle but firm. "You're not alone anymore. You found the right place, and we're going to help you. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, that's what we do here." "Why?" Jessica's voice broke. "Why would strangers help me?" "Because once, not so long ago, I was where you are. Lost, afraid, convinced that no one cared." Bull reached out and took her hand. "And then strangers showed up for me. Bikers, veterans, a nurse who remembered. People I'd never met who became family in a single morning." He gestured around the office, at the photos on the walls, at the certificates and awards, at the map showing Guardian Angels chapters spreading across the country. "All of this exists because people showed up. That's the secret, Jessica. That's the only secret worth knowing. We show up for each other. That's how we survive. That's how we heal. That's how we transform the worst days of our lives into something that helps others." Jessica was crying openly now. "I didn't think anyone cared." "A lot of people care. You just couldn't see them yet." Bull squeezed her hand. "But now you can. And you're one of us now, part of the family. Whatever comes next, you won't face it alone." He called for Angela to come help get Jessica settled with resources, food, temporary housing. The machinery of compassion that he'd helped build swung into action, just as it had hundreds of times before. As Jessica was led away, still tearful but no longer hopeless, Bull wheeled back to his window and looked out at the sunset. 1 year ago, a cop had tried to take his van. Now, instead of destruction, there was creation. Instead of hatred, grace. Instead of isolation, connection. The greatest revenge, Bull realized, wasn't destroying your enemies. It was building something so good, so necessary, so filled with love that the darkness couldn't touch it. His phone rang. He answered without looking at the caller ID. "Guardian Angels Foundation, this is Bull Thornton." "Bull?" Hammer's voice, rougher than usual. Turn on the news. Bull grabbed the remote and flicked on the television mounted in his office. A news anchor was speaking, her expression serious. And in what authorities are calling a miracle, the 47 veterans trapped in the flooded community center were rescued by a convoy of motorcycle riders who arrived just as waters reached critical levels. Witnesses say the bikers, all wearing patches identifying them as members of the Guardian Angels Veteran Assistance Network, formed a human chain to evacuate the disabled and elderly first. Bull watched the footage, leather-clad figures wading through chest-deep water, carrying veterans on their shoulders, refusing to leave until everyone was safe. "That's the Phoenix chapter," Hammer said. "They heard about the flood and mobilized in 20 minutes. Didn't wait for official authorization, just went." "Anyone hurt?" "Not a single casualty, all 47 safe." Hammer's voice was thick. "Bull, this is what you built. This is what we built. Those people are alive because we showed up." Bull couldn't speak, couldn't find words for what he was feeling. On the screen, a reporter was interviewing one of the rescued veterans, an elderly man in a wheelchair, wrapped in a blanket, tears streaming down his face. "They came out of nowhere," the old man said, "like angels, real angels. I thought I was going to die, and then these bikers appeared and told me everything was going to be okay. They carried me on their backs through the water. They saved my life." "Do you know who they were?" "They said they were guardian angels. Said there was a man named Bull who taught them that no veteran stands alone." The old man looked directly into the camera. "Whoever you are, Bull, thank you. Thank you for giving me one more day with my grandchildren." Bull turned off the television. He sat in silence as darkness fell outside his window, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The explosion in Afghanistan, the years of pain, the morning at the VA, the bikers who blocked the exits, the federal agent, the suicidal cop, the millions of dollars, the Medal of Honor, the legislation, the foundation, the chapters spreading across the country, the thousands of veterans helped, the lives saved. All of it connecting, weaving together into something larger than any single thread. Grace transforming, love remaining, brotherhood enduring. His phone buzzed one more time, a text from an unknown number. "Sergeant Thornton, I'm a veteran in Minneapolis. I just watched the flood rescue on the news. I've been thinking about ending things for a while now, but watching those bikers save those people made me think, maybe there's another way. Is there someone I can talk to?" Bull typed his reply without hesitation. "There is, and you just found them. Call this number, someone will answer. Someone will help. You're not alone anymore. You never have to be alone again." He attached the Guardian Angels hotline number and hit send. Then William Bull Thornton, Green Beret, Medal of Honor recipient, survivor, founder, father to thousands of veterans he'd never meet, wheeled back to his desk and got back to work. Because somewhere out there, another veteran was struggling. Another family was breaking. Another person was wondering if anyone cared. And the answer was yes. The answer was always yes. The answer was a man in a wheelchair who refused to let hatred win. The answer was a brotherhood of bikers who dropped everything to protect a stranger. The answer was a nation remembering what it owed to those who served. The answer was grace, wild, unpredictable, transformative grace, flowing from the darkest day into a future brighter than anyone could have imagined. And it all started with a simple truth that Bull had learned in a VA parking lot, surrounded by leather and chrome and the thundering hearts of warriors who refused to let him fall. No veteran stands alone. Not today, not ever. Not while there's breath in our lungs and love in our hearts and brothers willing to block every exit until justice is done. That was the legacy of William Bull Thornton. That was the promise of the Guardian Angels. That was the truth that would echo through generations, and it would never, ever be forgotten.